Hello, and welcome to In Pursuit of Clarity, episode number 34, entitled The Cancerous Effects of Lowered Standards. I tend to think most people on all sides of the political and ideological spectrums recognize that standards are rapidly falling all around us, with regard to civility and fundamental decency, or beauty and our aesthetic sensibilities, or merit and achievement, or how we communicate. More or less a plummeting of standards across the board. Many people don't think much about such issues, or if and when they do, often consider them of little importance, perhaps tangential and peripheral to the more important issues we're grappling with at the moment. I strongly disagree with this, and in this cast I'd like to attempt to make the point that these falling standards are both cause and effect of all the hellishness we're currently welcoming into our world. And that if left unchecked, this process of degradation and degeneration will lead to a life not worth living, and a humanity incapable of even recognizing the divine. Let's start with an extreme example to emphatically communicate the idea and set the stage. Picture yourself transported to another world, populated by beings much like us, but essentially angelic in nature. Their smiling faces radiant, their garments spotless and clean, bodies healthy and fit, coupled with a noble bearing and impressive posture, and strong and graceful movements. Their streets are as clean and as beautiful as their homes, and the gardens and greenery all about you look as if they're the products of generations of planning and careful cultivation and tending. But the most striking aspect of all is their manner of communication. Their voices are confident, but not the least bit arrogant, full of energy, yet somehow effortlessly soothing. And the structure of their speech is efficient, purposeful, and exacting, yet not the least bit overly clinical, or humorless or lifeless, quite the opposite. After a few minutes of taking in this breathtaking world and its exceptional inhabitants, might you give some thought to how presentable you look, or stand a bit straighter or taller, or when spoken to, give additional thought and attention to your words? Might you feel inspired to improve and become a better version of yourself in a variety of ways? Now picture you're transported again in the blink of an eye, this time to the center of the worst part of Haiti, let's say. The smell of trash and waste immediately hits you, and you're surrounded by flies, garbage, open sewage, and individuals beaten down from enduring a lifetime of such environments. You see scattered smiles from time to time, but they quickly fade, and more often it's anger or unhappiness you read on their faces, or a numbness and deadness to the world. You read this in the stooped and slouching postures and unhealthy bodies, and the seemingly careless approach to both appearance and upkeep. You hear a great deal of yelling, what seems to be scolding, as they communicate between dilapidated huts made of discarded metal sheets, plywood, and tarps. Picture remaining in this environment for some time. Might it eventually have a relaxing effect with regard to your habits and your standards therein? Very much the opposite of the former environment? For the vast majority of us, if we're honest, the answer is of course. We tend to act, at least in part, according to the norms created by those around us, and by prevailing culture at large. If we grow up witnessing people throwing all of their trash on the ground for years on end, chances are good that we won't see such a move as a travesty against nature, in the same way that someone being raised in a polar opposite environment might. So I'm guessing you're all with me so far in understanding this example and its relation to our topic, so let's go further. Standards don't just prevent us from looking slovenly and sporting stained sweatpants or wrinkled oversized t-shirts as a habit, or keep us from speaking Ebonics or some degenerated and bastardized form of English, allowing our words to tumble out thoughtlessly in a scarcely comprehensible jumble. And in fact, even as our standards plummet, we still have a subset of clean and attractively presented people, and others who are well-spoken and efficient and effective in their communication. In fact, Modern culture has created subsets that fetishize and specialize down these paths. Individuals that may be a dirty and chaotic hellscape on the inside, but devote the majority of their hours in their day to being freshly scrubbed, well manicured, and to wearing the latest fashions to an obsessive degree, to create a convincing mask insinuating health. Or those types of mediocre intellects, completely hollow and devoid of strong and sincere convictions, who've learned to effectively regurgitate talking points they've memorized, or read the words of a speechwriter or teleprompter with eloquence, to appear more intelligent and knowledgeable or thoughtful. But this trend of focusing time and attention on style over substance, on creating a pretty mask and ignoring the cultivation of everything real and foundational just behind it, is something of a digression and worthy of its own separate discussion. Though it's not a complete digression, as it's a trend that certainly represents a fundamental degradation of standards. But I'd argue that there's something even more important happening, at a deeper level just out of view. The best way to describe it might be a dampening of will and positive willfulness. A lowering of energy level, if energy here is to be understood as referring to more than the merely physical or intellectual. If we transport ourselves back in time, let's say to any highly civilized location in Europe, and zoom in on individuals, say, leaving a waltz, after a long night of dancing or socializing. Envision the thought processes of a 20-something male headed home down beautifully kept cobblestone streets in the moonlight. His thoughts may roam to the beautiful castle or ballroom he's just left, or the grace and dignity in the manner and movements of all involved. He may think of the beautiful women and their exquisitely crafted, elegant dress, perhaps with his thoughts settling on one in particular, of good breeding and unquestioned honor. And this exceptional figure might become something of a muse, a driving force and inspiration for accomplishment, achievement, personal betterment, or refinement. Perhaps his thoughts then turn to his schooling or his apprenticeship, and paths he might take to do some meaningful good in the world, to impress her or her parents, but also her aside, his peers, his family, perhaps a teacher he especially respects. He might think of the storied history of the great school, or his renowned professor, who, let's say, recently wrote one of the defining philosophical works of his generation, and similar sage men and intellectual giants amidst those hallowed halls. He might look at the moonlight as it reflects on his beautiful and peaceful city, fit for a postcard, and allow his mind to wander, uplifted, towards thoughts of great men, great deeds, and how he might someday make an impact himself. Let's move forward to our present day and compare this scene to a modern equivalent. Another young man, perhaps leaving a dance club, after hours of mindless thumping bass appealing solely to his animal nature, perhaps with his arm around some drunken girl he's just met, or just tonight found on a dating app, who perhaps scarcely knows his name, and he's completely forgotten hers, as he navigates streets and back alleys covered in graffiti, strewn with broken bottles, the occasional needle, with the all-pervasive stench of human waste emanating from God knows where. All the while considering what words he might say to get the one thing he's after for the night. And additionally, considering some crafty way of parting ways with the girl afterwards. He's briefly annoyed by a reminder of the schooling he'll have to wake up to the next morning, picturing his droning professor discussing the empowered woman's role in maximizing racial equity, who, despite having the most impressive credentials he's ever seen, and recent books that have made the New York Times bestseller list, seems completely incapable of any depth of thought beyond her narrow socio-political realm, and often has trouble formulating any profound or intriguing thought arising from her own mind, but instead constantly reverts to that communicative crutch of stringing together politically correct cliches and maxims. He feels dead inside, and when and if he does think of the future, his thoughts are geared towards how to secure a consistent paycheck, to have his television, his beer, his sports, and his comfort. And he's willing to keep his head down and make whatever compromises are necessary to get there. Standards and norms within any specific category don't exist in isolation. Very much the opposite. Our every influence is tweaking our frequency and our norms. When standards fall in one place, they have something like a gravitational effect of dragging them down in several others. And when they begin to fall universally, on nearly all fronts simultaneously, they begin to sap our will to live. And perhaps even more importantly, our very will itself. Our desire to become, in the deepest sense of that word. To grow, to create, to aspire and inspire. The phenomenon has a similar effect on our ability to recognize beauty, or help foster it in the world. Everything slowly cheapens and degrades, becomes less potent and vital and energetic. It's as if we slowly begin to grind to a halt, collectively. Sure, life still goes on, and we all continue to go through the usual motions. Yet, slowly but surely, the horizon becomes flat and featureless, lacking not just the great towering peaks more common in previous ages, but even the valleys. The best of the ancient Greek tragedies, for example, were the products of this exceptional energy and vitality. These great downturns, so effectively captured in verse, helped set the stage for the most profound victories and justified celebrations. Maintaining this energy and greatness doesn't mean banishing all sadness or melancholy, but rather that our highest and lowest points are worthy to be told, considered, and mulled over, as opposed to a lukewarm pettiness and mediocrity, a life in which nothing really moves the needle. There's certainly some safety and comfort to be found here, but it comes at the cost of life itself. And by life here, I mean actually living, being and becoming our potential. The greatest writers, artists, architects, even leaders and generals all had a muse of some sort, or were otherwise pushed and driven by powerful reasons to do and create. What becomes of a world that lacks these impulses? What happens when we experience not only a universal energy drain, but an inability to harness and channel what energy we do have towards higher thoughts and actions? There's many devastating effects resulting from this cause, and we couldn't begin to quantify them all if we tried. But one I'm certain about is this: insanity is a result. Because the microcosm is always a direct reflection of and inexorably intertwined with the macrocosm, the individual's health and happiness and orientation has much to do with that of the whole, the family, the community, the nation, etc. When things on the macro level begin to take on a character of aimlessness, a nation or world that seems lost or purposeless, individuals within begin to feel increasingly so. And when they're unable to find any suitable channel for their energy, they're likely to either dissipate it in several unsuitable directions at once, just to have that feeling of doing something, or allow it to build indefinitely until someday it explodes, usually to negative effect. Our increasingly mad world seems composed largely of these two types, more and more with the passage of time. And what's happening here is far beyond the mere economic or political, and thus merely imposing a new economic or political system atop this foundation of poisonous chaos and expecting this to somehow right the ship is absurd. The phrase rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic springs to mind and seems appropriate here. There needs to be a cultural and spiritual awakening of sorts before any truly healthy manner of living might be fostered. And this simply can't happen when all organs of influence across social media and traditional media are in the hands of those that hate us and our preferred way of life, and want to see us powerless and restrained, one might even say decimated and destroyed in every respect. This is why I recently mentioned the topic of breakaway communities, or some similar manifestation of this concept in my latest video. What I'm about to say is extremely important, and if you take something away from this cast, I'd prefer it to be this. I believe we'll need to draw a line in the sand soon, a red line, which, if not respected, will lead to a reaction. And this ultimatum, of sorts, to be voiced to this sick culture, is as follows. Just as you, on the other side of the ideological fence, have the right to celebrate and push your culture, beliefs, ideas, and standards on your own children and those within your broader cultural circle, and we have no right to forcibly impose our own, the reverse of this must be true, and will soon refuse to tolerate anything less. Those pushing a denial of biological realities like race or gender, or pushing for drag queens to become normalized role models and teachers for our children, or framing anti-white and anti-Western sentiment as if it were righteous religious doctrine, and proceeding to rewrite history accordingly. They have absolutely no right to force such things on our children, or drum into their heads a paralyzing self-hatred, or a criminally dishonest idea of who they are, where they came from, and who their ancestors were. This is essentially child abuse, aggressive and adversarial brainwashing. It's an attack. Defense against such attacks isn't simply acceptable, it's an absolute necessity for anyone considering themselves a decent person or a responsible parent. It's mandatory from the perspective of any well-oriented person. So what does this mean? It means I believe our ideal solution as things stand may be separation. At the very least, parallel networks of education, information, socialization. And if this proves impossible or insufficient with regards to keeping this disease at bay, physical separation may be a necessity. Consider, for a moment, just how different life would be if the news and information you took in throughout the day wasn't so negative and spiritually draining. If the faces you saw and voices you heard throughout the day weren't overtly hostile. If those who had some say in your day-to-day life weren't actively working against you, seeking means and methods to disempower and wrest control away, and destroy the sovereignty of yourself and your family, but instead represented the polar opposite of all of this. Imagine how profoundly life might change if you were completely freed from that carrot and stick held by the most disreputable sorts of human beings, needing nothing from them, fearing nothing from them, and instead having a large extended family at your back, all eager and willing to defend and support one another. And it's important to state again here, I'm not suggesting we completely detach and leave all of those outside of these communities to suffer the worst of what's to come without a care in the world, or that we should be politically or ideologically disengaged and further relegate absolute power in our nations to these culture destroyers and their paymasters. Just the opposite, in fact. I believe such environments might act as far more efficient and effective springboards to real engagement in the world, to meaningful and well-planned and properly considered engagement. And in fact, this could be part of their very purpose. It wouldn't be a purely selfish enterprise to detach ourselves from the noise and the bad air of the marketplace, but a means to work directly together with like minds to improve conditions both inside and outside, especially for those like-minded facing struggles outside these walls. We're rapidly hurtling towards conditions in which simply being a reasonable and honest or principled human being could lead to the destruction of one's career and livelihood, mob assaults, even jail time. And if these trends continue, life within this system might soon be simply intolerable. Human beings weren't meant to live this way. It's unhealthy in the deepest possible sense of this word. This is a profoundly important topic, one I hesitated bringing up in such a broad strokes, side note type manner in both the last video and in this cast. But I'll certainly be following up with some additional thoughts in the near future. And I think expressing the broader idea itself is important in a time-sensitive way. Things are happening very quickly now. And because nothing significant simply happens overnight, and all things require focused thought leading to envisioning and imagining as a first step, I'm hoping to play some role in helping spark some of this. And I'll leave it at that for now. and get back to finishing the next Subverted History video. I hope you're all well, and thanks for listening.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only